I grew up in an extremely small town in Texas until the age of 13, where all the childhood memories I have are from. My dad lived in Austin and picked me up every other weekend, holidays, and during the summer. So I knew there was another world out there, but this was my home. This is what I was familiar with. As you can imagine, in a small town, we're talking 393 people population. Everyone knows everything about everyone. There was plenty of petty crime, like drug use and the occasional peeping Tom, but that person was known to the public by everyone in the town, and they soon left after the event. You got away with nothing if someone else knew about it. Let me mention, because this small town was surrounded by larger towns, we were hardly even considered a school district. K-12th grade in one school, barely 1A, and if you're from Texas, you know what I mean. We didn't even have a real stoplight, and to this day, I don't even know if they do now. One gas station that was closed half the time, and no grocery store. So this town had a voluntary fire department, but no police. That's right, none. You'd call and get the next town's police, which were in the same county. So they considered themselves our police, but were located 20 miles away. 20 miles to drive to an emergency call. So, in my late childhood, when I was around 10, we heard about this handyman named Kyle. Middle-aged big guy who everyone worked with and had inappropriately touched a couple of kids in the town. One of them being my next-door neighbor, a teenage girl whose dad considered Kyle his brother. We all knew what he looked like and felt some type of shame for being so naive and nice, because everyone had met or knew him and thought nothing negative. Even felt safety around him at one point. Those two occasions happened over a year's time, and we hadn't seen him around since the news came out and the kids came forward. He creeped us out, and every adult in town shunned him. Adios, Kyle. So flash forward 3 years. I am in 6th grade, and one of my schoolmates' parents have asked my mother if their 2 daughters can stay on a school night, because they had to go to court very early in the morning and needed to prepare. It was no problem, as my mum was a single parent and very understanding. My mum is a very sweet and understanding person, with hardly any boundaries, because she's so understanding, which gets her into trouble but is also very nice to have in a parent. We played outside in the neighborhood most of the day, and came back to set up my room for 3 beds, and my mum would be getting dinner ready. When we got back, we noticed my mum seemed like she was going somewhere, and had left to come back, which was unusual, because there really wasn't anywhere to go. But then I noticed she was drunk, heavily drunk. How long had we been gone? The sun just went down, maybe 2 hours. A little backstory. My mum is tiny, 5'1", 120 pounds. She never drank in my childhood, and when she did it was extremely noticeable. Glassy eyes, slurring, wandering eyes, anger, lying, making no sense, but I could only name a handful of times that happened, and when it did, she had 1 beer. Anytime I saw her with this beer, I would get mad, because I knew she wouldn't be normal. She rarely did this, so I remember almost every tantrum I threw. That's why this wasted behavior made no sense to me, because I knew it was the alcohol. I was immediately embarrassed. My poor friends had to see this mess. I herded them straight to my room, where we got ready for our school day the next morning and tucked ourselves in without any dinner. I knew they must be hungry, so I sat there wide awake, thinking about what we could make the next morning to make up for it. The only light in the room was glowing from the doorframe that faced the kitchen. I guessed my mum must be in there. We'd all heard she was shuffling around. Then my friend shook my leg. She said, "Zoe, did you hear that man?" I lay there frozen. Worry hit the pit of my stomach, and I quickly remembered that I hadn't heard my mother in over an hour. Had she left after we arrived? Did she drive her car that drunk? Is she back? I listened closely, ears ringing from being so alert. Then I heard a woman's laugh, trying to be quiet, but obviously failing, like a teenage girl sneaking around the house from her parents. Yep, it was my mum, but the male's voice who came after is what threw a lump in my throat. It was so familiar, and I listened even closer. Then, the next sentence I heard sent my full body into a tingle. My head went hot, and I could even hear my heartbeat. I even felt it in my ears. The man said, "So there's 3 of them there? She's having a sleepover?" I jumped out of my bed and leapt into my bedroom door, telling my friends to stay there. I crept out into the hallway and grabbed the house phone from the stand. I turned to the kitchen and took a deep breath before I ran full force into the middle of them, physically pushing my mum behind me and in between the two of us. It was Kyle. I stared him in the face and screamed in the only voice my 13-year-old body could muster. "Get out of my house!" He stumbled back, surprised and obviously drunk himself. My mum came full force behind me, pulling me back, but luckily at this age I was 5'5" already and easily her weight. I had her taken. Other than stumble, she hadn't moved. I stared at him right in the face and dialed 911. And before I hit talk, I screamed again, "Get out of my house now, or I call the cops." My friend's parents are already on their way, which they weren't, but that's all I could think of. See, all I could think about was the fact that my mum was on the edge of blackout/passing out, which I could tell by the way she could hardly keep her eyes open and couldn't stand upright, and there was this town-known child molester in my kitchen who knows there are 3 early teenage girls in the next room sleeping. I was not about to let this guy be here if my mum passed out and we're left alone. He stared at me for a second, and I instinctively hit talk. We all heard the phone ring, and once he took me seriously, he ran off. I knew my mum was about to rage, so I ran after him, but towards the bathroom and locked myself in. The house was less than 800 square feet, so I saw him run out the front door as I made it to the bathroom in under 5 seconds. I told the operator the situation while shaking and crying, pleading with her to send help. I wasn't thinking of the trouble my mother would get in. I just wanted help and to keep my friends safe. I had no idea if he would return. The operator said help was on its way, but disconnected. They took 3 hours to arrive, and my friend's parents were already there trying to talk to my mum. The rest of the evening was horrendous while we waited for their parents. I think they eventually caught him for crime in another town, but I have no idea where he came from that night or why my mum picked him up. My mother could not recall the night because she was so intoxicated at the time. This night, unfortunately, was the kickoff of a 3-year blackout my mum had from alcoholism. It wasn't there, then one day it was, and it tore my family apart. My mum lost 3 years of her life, and those are 3 years I wish I had never had to live through, but it made us who we are today, and I wouldn't change that for the world. This was one of many scary situations my mother put me through, but I think bucking up to someone that vile at 12 was probably the one thing I'll always remember. So Kyle, I hope you're somewhere in prison, and that we never meet. I worked at a local coffee shop as a barista for a few months. I was 17 at the time, and I'm currently 20. My co-workers knew about Gregory, but never paid him much mind. He had a big scar, or birthmark, on the entire left half of his face. Sometimes he carried around a radio that only played static, and he would intently listen to it. He was known to hold up those crazy, "the world is ending and you're going to hell" signs. He was homeless. He would buy espresso shots with so much honey and lick the honey out the cup, which was always gross and unsightly. But he was never mean or too creepy, and didn't bother anyone. He just came off as weird with how he spoke and what he said. It was all over the place. He would jump from one sentence to the next, but it was still tangible. Anyway, one night I was working alone and later closing with my co-worker, who was a very small petite girl. Always smiling, not intimidating. It was probably 7 p.m. She came in at 8 or 8:30. Note, I am a trans guy, have short hair and all, but I'm not on hormones, so I still look kind of feminine. I had 2 regulars that sat at the bar with me, and it was not very full in the lobby, and in comes Gregory. But this time he seems a bit off, more so than usual. He comes up to the register and immediately said something like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm here to buy some coffee if I can, if the Lord'll let me have one tonight, 'cause my card may be empty, but if he says so." And I'm immediately like, "Okay," and ask him if he wants the same thing as usual. He repeats almost the exact same sentence, adding, "If the Lord will let me tonight, I'll have one. I don't got much. Maybe he wants me to go sleep instead of have a drink. But I'll see. If not, then I'll go to sleep." Like his sentences were very quick and erratic, hence the poor grammar. So I run his card, and it's empty. Gregory goes, "Ah well, looks like the Lord wants me to go to bed and not have a drink tonight. You know, if the Lord says it, it's the truth, right?" Which is assuming I'm religious in the first place. I live in Arkansas. And I just go, "Ah, yeah, sorry, Gregory. By the way, you left your hat in here last time. If it was still in here, I'd give it to you." He cuts me off, a bit aggressively. "Oh, I don't need possessions. They don't mean a thing compared to the Lord's love, you know. As long as I got my heart and soul, and as long as you got God and believe in Him, He'll do great things for you, you know. Say, what's your name again?" "Finn." "How old are you? You seem young." I said 19. At this point, when he asked my age, I was weirded out a bit more, but here's where it gets uncomfortable. He asks if I'm married. I didn't intentionally understand him, so I asked him again, and he goes, "Are you married?" I say, I'm not." As soon as I say no, he cuts me off and starts talking even more erratically and quickly, and almost stuttering over himself, where I have to try and focus to even listen. He told me his full name, his age, he was in his mid-50s, and when and where he was born. Then he goes on to say that he has no money, but to go to the Outback Steakhouse, find this person, give me their full name, and says he doesn't have any money right now because he gets his checks at the end of the month, but that won't be a problem for us. Obviously, I'm super creeped out. And reminder, the two regular guys at the bar are having to watch and hear this whole interaction go down. I finally decided I needed to ask him to leave and say, "Gregory, stop. I'm not married, but I have a boyfriend." Which is true. And I'm gonna have... I couldn't even finish my sentence, and he interrupts me again, raising his voice, saying, "Is he gonna commit to you? Is he? If not, you let me know and I'll take good care of you." And rattled on about how he can never find a woman to be with, also assuming I was a woman. I attempt to tell him he needs to leave, and firmly says no, and he gets physically angry. His facial expressions snapped from upset and confused to pissed. He doesn't say a word, but instead, in the middle of me saying no, whips around and walks out the door, slamming it super hard against the glass and walking down the sidewalk to leave. Luckily, no one in the lobby really heard much but the guys at the counter, and they were just as shocked as me. This was also the first time I had experienced any form of harassment at work, but that wasn't even the worst part. A week later, another regular, a woman a couple of years older than me, used to work at the lingerie shop and currently works at a diner. I don't know how we got into it, but she also had experience with Gregory. He apparently had walked into the store, where they sell gay items too, and asked angrily why they carried this sodomy in their stores, and proceeded to rub the lotions they had all over his face. I learned that he is constantly in and out of jail for trespassing into places that he's been banned from, including the coffee shop I worked at, which no one knew he was banned from. And he has some mental issues that he handles by doing drugs. I don't know what kind of drugs, but Arkansas is the meth state, and I can assume that's the kind of behavior it is. The second, and possibly worst incident with him, is when the woman I was talking to had a co-worker of hers who met Gregory at the diner. She was opening at 4:30 a.m. with her boyfriend when Gregory, who was already banned, knocked on the locked door and asked for food. The boyfriend said he needed to leave and go away. Gregory got angry and replied to the girl, "How dare you do this to me? Treat me in this way. Whatever happens to you next is your fault." He was later overheard saying that if he got a chance to be alone with her, he would assault her sexually. He's been known to threaten other women with that as well. I was already afraid that he would later come back while me and my small, sweet co-worker were working together to get some kind of revenge. But I wouldn't have expected that. I watched, and sometimes still watch, my back for a few months. I saw him once more before I stopped working at that job, and he sent chills down my spine. He glanced at me with zero expression, and I tried telling my male co-worker, who he treated normally with a creepy smile, not to serve him. I hid in the back and waited until he left, and thankfully haven't seen him since. Funny addition, but in the middle of him talking about how he can't find a woman, I was very close to saying that he's not even talking to a woman, but decided against it, thinking, well, he may very actually hurt me at this point. I now carry a knife on me wherever I go. Last December, a little before Christmas, my friend and I arrived home after our final exam. There's a little red light at a major intersection up ahead, and I begin to slow down. I came to a complete stop in the right/sidewalk lane of a 4-lane street, 2 in each direction, facing southbound, with 6 cars in front of me, and I'm stopped with a side street to my right. Suddenly, I hear tires screeching in a crash. I got hit, rear right of my car, by another driver. We get out, exchange information, and begin to take pictures of our respective vehicles. I look up the street to make sure I have a few hundred meters between myself and any vehicles approaching from the north before I step into the left southbound lane, so I can get a picture showing the angle of both of our cars and the street signs, which are rear right/northwest intersection off the side street. My friend calls me over to unlock the trunk so he can get his paperwork from his pack to write down his witness statement. And just as I step back into the right lane my car occupies, a northbound driver, who was so occupied with observing our collision, drifts into the left southbound lane, which I just stood in, and misses me by about a foot. He was travelling at roughly 70 kilometers an hour. That's roughly 43 miles per hour. 2 days later, I go paintballing with aforementioned friend and a few others. In between games, you go into the lobby with your mask off, and everyone is supposed to put their paintball marker gun on safe and have a barrel cover over the muzzle. I'm leaning against a wall in the lobby when a previous friend asks me if he can borrow money to buy more paint. My back is still leaning against the wall, but I lean to the right to hand him my wallet. As I put my hand there, I hear a loud splat against the wall I'm on. I look to find a paintball fired to where my head/eyes would have been had I not moved. Somehow, one of the kids across the room was putting his marker down on a table, and the barrel's cover retention bungee snapped, allowing the cover to fall off. The safety broke, and the marker fired around. A paintball in the eye at 250 could have been a game changer, to say the least. 2 days later, I'm out drinking with the friends I went paintballing with, and some others. We're walking down a major street, and I'm naturally a fast walker, so every 25 meters I'm stopping, turning back, and waiting for everyone to catch up. At one point, I look back and see everyone is still pretty far back, but it's cold and we're practically at our destination, so instead of stopping to wait, I decide to just keep walking ahead. Then, for some reason, I decide to stop and shout back to them that I'll meet them inside. Just as I do so, I hear a loud engine roaring up the street, and turn to see a speeding Porsche 10 meters in front of me hit the west wall of a building literally at a right angle, so hard that more than half of its engine compartment caved in. The airbags deployed and the windows all shattered. Had I kept walking without saying anything to my friends, I probably would have been in between the car and the building. 2 days later, it's Boxing Day morning, and I was out a few times throughout the night because I was excited to go pick up some items with my friends. The same one from the collision, because I was excited to go pick up some items with my friend. The same one from the collision/paintball/night out. At one point through the night, I have a nightmare of sorts. The earliest part of the dream I can remember is me leaping out of a panel door van with a rope in my hand. I have no idea why, but in the dream in my mind I knew that someone was trying to kill me. As my feet hit the ground, I find myself in my driveway. I run inside the house, and for some reason, tie the rope to the front door's doorknob, knowing that on the other end of the rope, the killer is tied to it. I lock and barricade all the doors and windows and call 911. The operator tells me every officer is busy with something and no one can help me. I hang up the phone. I'm about to call someone else when I notice the rope has been cut. Trying to stay silent and listen for the killer, I suddenly notice that everything that can possibly make a sound in the house is given her. Kettle, stove fan, toilet, shower, TV, radio, everything. I look up at the top of the stairs and see someone's foot hit the first step and start walking down the stairs. I wake up screaming and sweating, and the first words out of my mouth before I can even think to process it as a dream are Slender Man. I used to live in a townhouse duplex by myself, with my dog and 2 cats near a train station. There were often commuters who would park outside my place and pass by throughout the day and night. Occasionally I had cigarettes or stuff stolen from my front veranda. I even had my next-door neighbor's ex-boyfriend come to my door telling me he had a hitman after him with a gun. But none of this scared me, like the night I was watched. My dog lives indoors, and I would take him out just to pee before bed. My backyard light was broken and was up too high to change the bulb, so I always took him out the front. That night it was around 11, and I took him out the front. It was a hot summer night, and I was mindlessly standing on the footpath when I saw movement from across the road from me. Out of nowhere, a man had appeared and was walking diagonally across the street away from me. I thought it odd, because I hadn't seen him come from the other direction. I continued to think about it. Where he came from was outside a house that was being renovated. I knew the owners weren't living there, and thought maybe he was going to try and steal stuff. So I kept looking down the road to see where he had gone. He had turned the corner down the next street. I kept watching, and then I realized I see his head pop around the corner to see if I'm still outside. This gives me the absolute creeps, so I grabbed my dog and went in. I turned off all the lights and went upstairs to my bedroom, which was at the front of the townhouse and faces the street. I thought I would keep watch of my neighbour's house and call the police if he came back. I peer through my blinds, which cover sliding doors coming off a small balcony, and like clockwork, I see a dark figure walk down from the corner and down my street. He's moving towards the house across the road, and then I suddenly lose sight of him. A tree in front of my townhouse obscures my view for a moment, and then he's there. He's not just there. He has stopped in front of my driveway, standing there like Jason Voorhees. I kid you not. His arms were out by his sides and legs apart in an unnatural stance, like he was prepping for something, like he wanted to kill me. My heart is racing so hard I can barely hear, and I'm standing there, slack-jawed, looking at this would-be assailant, when one of my cats comes to see what's happening. My cat slides his body between the blinds and windows, further opening it to see this person, this man, looking towards me. I'm thinking he surely sees me, and if he does, this doesn't stop him. He starts walking down my driveway, undeterred and fixated. I lose sight of him under the balcony and awning. By this time my eyes are watering in fear and tears and streaming down my face. I don't know what to do. I go sit on my bed. I picked up my mobile and dialed my dad, who lives a suburb away. He answers, and I whisper to him what was happening, and he says he'll be there as soon as he can. I lie down in my bed and lie as still as possible, tears rolling down my cheeks. Pure fear, not knowing what this man was doing downstairs and if he could get in. What if I hadn't have locked the doors? And then it dawned on me. Why am I lying here in the dark crying? Turn a light on. So I did. What seemed like a lifetime but was probably just a couple of minutes later, my dad arrived. He had an umbrella with him. I live in Australia, so no guns, but he could have at least brought a knife. I stayed on the phone with Dad while he searched outside, but the man was gone. Maybe me turning the light on scared him. I called the police, who said I should have called sooner. Of course I should have. I don't know why I didn't. They came out with a sniffer dog, but couldn't find him either. I don't know what he wanted, but for a good year after that, I was so scared living there, and I'm still a scaredy cat. But hearing other stories makes me realize I'm not alone, and we can all learn from these experiences, so we know what to do if something scary happens. This happened a couple of weeks ago. I live in a major city. My street is a narrow one-way. Cars can parallel park on one side of the street, and it fits 30 cars. I'm outside my door, which is at the end of the street, smoking a cigarette before bed. I'm looking across the street, and to my right I see something out of the corner of my eye. Behind one of the parked cars way down. It was just a movement. I didn't really get a good look at it, so I kept smoking, and a couple of seconds later I saw it again. This time it looked like someone had ducked behind the cars. This street is well lit, but it was hard to see because there were maybe 25 or so cars, and it was fast. It was about 3 seconds, and I saw a head pop up from the car in front of the last one I saw. It was clearly a head. Then it ducked down again, and before I knew it, it had happened again, and popped up in front of that car, and was still now. Whoever it was knew I saw him. He ducked again and in a flash was popping his head up from the next car, getting closer to me. He definitely knew that I saw him. He moved really fast, but not supernaturally fast, just very quick. Up until this point, I was curious, but now feeling really uneasy. I'm 5'11" and 185 pounds, and work out, but I can't remember the last fight I had. It was so creepy. He's now about 6 cars lengths away, and I can see him clearly. He's looking directly at me. He looks pretty normal, bigger than me and has glasses on. Then he ducks again. I almost pissed myself and ran into my house, and closed the door and looked through the peephole. I could only see one car, and half of another one, and could imagine the guy ducking down and scurrying to the next car, and popping up again. I was just about to stop looking as he popped up right in the back of the car and parked in front of my house. He definitely could not see me. I had no lights on in the hallway outside and inside, but he just stood there looking at me. He looked like he was mad about something. He took his glasses off and wiped them and stuck them in his pocket. I couldn't see his lower half, but it looked like he was wearing a long coat. He was looking directly at me. For a minute, it looked like he was going to walk, and I was hoping he was not going to come around the car and get up to my door. Then he ducked down and out of sight. I was getting freaked out at this point. I stood at the door until 3:25 a.m, listening. Then I went to bed and was awake listening for a while. When I was roughly 11 or 12, our family cat, that we had had for a really long time, was somewhat sick. Not really sick, I guess, just obviously getting a little too old and was clearly not going to live much longer. This cat was a big deal in my family. My dad loved this guy to death and was so close with him. His name was Mac, and he was black with white paws and a white chin and belly, and he would, apparently, sit outside my door when I was a baby while I napped, and wouldn't let any visitors come into the room. Once I was old enough, he would let me sleep in my bed where I napped. He slept with my dad probably just about every night for the 15 years or so we had him. Very close with the family, basically. I ended up going to a birthday party one night when Mac wasn't doing well. It was a sleepover at a hotel, and all my friends were going, so I felt as if I couldn't miss it. I had recently gotten this little rubber black cat from the dentist, as my dentist had a box of cheap toys and candy that you could pick something out of after your appointment. I got the toy because it reminded me of Mac, and he was sick at the time, so I thought I should take it to the sleepover with me, since I was leaving him for the night. Well, me being the stupid kid I was, I took it with me and played with it in the pool and all over the hotel. Easily could have lost it, but I was pretty sure I still had it by the end of the night and had put it back in my bag before going to sleep. The next morning I woke up and got a call from my parents on my friend's parents' cell phone. I asked them how Mac was doing, and they sadly told me he had passed away the night before. I was extremely sad, and the rest of the kids tried to comfort me, as well as 11-year-olds can, and I ended up going home with my other friend at the party, as my parents were working on something by then and couldn't pick me up. When I got to the house, I looked in my bag for my toy, since I was super sad and wanted something comforting, and couldn't find the thing anywhere. I emptied the whole bag, which had a total of about 5 items in it, and it was gone. I cried because I knew I must have left it at the hotel somewhere, and was not going to get it back. Obviously not a huge deal, but my cat just died, and the toy that looked like him was gone too. So too much for an 11-year-old me to handle. I went home later in the day and forgot to unpack my bag. When I went to sleep that night, I had this really strangely realistic dream that I was sitting in my living room with my dad, and Mac just strolls into the room like cats do. My dad said something like, "Mac, you came back," and was really happy and petting him, and I was so confused how it was happening. When I woke up, I had a weird feeling that just seemed to be telling me to get up and to walk into my parents' room. I walked in there, and my little black toy cat was sitting right on my mother's dresser. I was like, wow, super weird that I had just had that dream, and then found this again right after. I wonder where my mum found it. When I asked her about it, assuming that she maybe unpacked my bag and found it in there somehow, she had no idea what I was talking about, and didn't even recognize the toy. She said she hadn't unpacked my bag yet. So, not that scary, more kind of cute. I still do have the toy at home though, although I'm not exactly sure where. But I couldn't throw it away, because coincidence or not, I always saw it as a goodbye to me from Mac, since I wasn't there to say goodbye. This happened a number of years ago. At the time, I lived in Aberdeen, Scotland. I was a 24-year-old Scottish guy who shared a flat with a 27-year-old Romanian girl. We were friendly, but not friends, and on her birthday, she asked me if I wanted to go out for a few drinks with her and her friends. She worked at this really cheap and depressing stripper joint behind a bar, so could get free drinks. Fortunately, I already had plans, so declined her offer. I had been there before, and it was grim. So anyway, we both go out on separate nights out. I come home a little drunk about 2:30 or 3, grab some water, brush my teeth, and get into bed. I get woken up at 4 or 5 a.m. by some doors in the flat opening and closing, and what sounds like some drunken staggering, so I assume she's just a little drunk. No big deal. After a while, I can make her out talking quietly, and the lower tones of a man responding. I'm kinda surprised at this, as she never had once brought someone back from a night out. But hey, it's her birthday, and I'm not one to judge. Just to make sure they know they've woken me, however, and to try and make sure I don't have to hear anything more, I do a rather loud forced cough, so that they will hopefully keep it down. I hear a door close and think good, so I go back to sleep. We both slept in the next morning, but I'm up first and start making breakfast in the kitchen. Eventually she comes through, looking terrible after having been sick in the toilet. She starts getting some water, and I cheekily ask her, "Have fun last night then?" She kind of blearily responds, "Yeah, it was okay." And I'm like, "Nice try. I know you brought back a guy." And she goes white. Startled, she said, "That actually happened?" Confused by her reaction, I ask what she means. She responds, "I thought that was a bad dream." Turns out she didn't bring him back. He had followed her home. The lock at the entry to our block of flats was broken at the time. She had left the strip club after starting to feel really drunk and sick, and she hadn't locked the door to the flat itself as she came in, because she thought she was going to be sick. She rushed to the toilet, and when she went back to her bedroom, she got undressed and went into bed. She was almost asleep when she realized she wasn't alone in the room. She'd managed to stammer the question, "What do you want?" Alarmed, he loudly and hurriedly replied, "I just want water." She said, "I can get you some water," just trying to keep calm in the hopes it wouldn't escalate. And then they hear the cough. My extra loud and hopefully masculine sounding cough startled him, and the prospect of a man in the flat apparently scared him off, as he ran out the room. That, or the fact that she wasn't unconscious. She hurriedly locked the door and went back to bed and passed out. I made her report the incident to the police, and they immediately sent 2 officers round, and they interviewed her and scoured through CCTV. This was apparently not the first time this had happened in the area, and it appeared the man was working his way up to an attack of some kind. They said it was lucky I coughed and spooked him. They were also convinced that she had likely had something slipped into her drink, but she didn't want to have her urine tested. I think she had been doing some coke. They wanted to make sure she hadn't just mistakenly invited him back, and she pointed out that there was no chance of this, that she wasn't attracted to him at all. When they reviewed the CCTV, he could clearly be seen following her home, but they couldn't figure out where he went after he left. And I hope to never encounter an uninvited creep again. When I was 12, my parents left town for a second honeymoon at Niagara Falls. They left my brother, who was 17, in charge of 12-year-old me and my 10-year-old sister. A few days after my parents left, my brother told me that my sister was sleeping over at her friend's house, and that he was getting drunk and high at his buddy's place. He gave me very good instructions to not set the house on fire or to rip my balls off, and that I would have the house to myself. A few hours after my brother left, my Saint Bernard started barking his head off at the woods near my house. I thought there was just a bear or a wild dog nearby, and my dog wanted to fight. It was really aggressive towards strangers in his territory. I ignored him for about half hour, and I got sick of the barking and went downstairs to lock him in my parents' room. But as I went to go to the living room to grab him, I saw a man looking straight at my dog through the glass door. He was trying to pick the lock. I freaked out and told him to piss off, and barely managed to wrangle my dog into my room. I called the police and then my parents. The police came by 25 minutes later and basically told me they picked up a guy trying to break into a parked car, and they wanted to see if it was the guy who tried to break in, as the idiot didn't wear a mask for either crimes. Sure enough it was, and he also confessed to being the culprit behind other burglaries around town, and he also ratted out his meth cooking / selling partners. This actually happened a little less than a month ago. It was 2 AM and I was bored, so I went out to this park a bit out of town to go biking. It's, for the most part, surrounded by trees at all ends, with a running / biking track that goes around the park. The park was lined with streetlights throughout, so you could vaguely see. I'd been going there for a few times that week, around that time, because it unwinded me, and it felt good to be outside. But this time, when I was making my rounds, I see 4 6-year-old looking figures coming out the forest. It was between 4 to 7 of them, but these little things didn't have any parents with them, and they all just seemingly stayed silhouetted. I was kind of biking in their general direction, and they started coming at me. Thankfully I was around 200 feet away from them, but I could make them out, and the spooky little kids were coming. I don't think I've biked faster in my entire life. I literally became Lance Armstrong with an extra testicle for a good 3 minutes. It was unexplainable. I've been alone and haven't seen a single person all the times I went, and I haven't gone since, needless to say. Alas, I'm stuck on a bus again with 40 minutes of time to kill, and no music in my new phone. This happened to me in June. Our school exams start around June 20th every year, and well, I choose to not do math the entire year and study hardcore the last month. Our school is a private school, and I can't afford without a scholarship, so I have to get good results on those exams. So I got a tutor, who's also my best friend's mum. I spend almost every day at their place, which is on the other side of our small city. I live in Armenia for context, and we're a poor second world country, so our public transport kinda sucks. A taxi is expensive. Minimum from our place to theirs is about 1,000 dram, which is like $2, but is more like 15 for us. So I have a crappy minibus for 40 minutes every time I go and come back. Now, until then, my experience with public transports were pretty mild. I'm a girl, which, if you're not an ogre, results in at least a small amount of unnecessary attention. But you get used to it after a while. Nothing too worrying. I got hit on once or twice, and stared at a lot, but it never really bothered me. I get away with it most of the time because of my chronic angry face. I look like the most unapproachable person in the world, let alone the bus or the station. So when this happened, I was beyond shocked. That particular day, I had to stay longer than usual. It was 4 days before the exam, and I was extra panicky. Also should note that I looked like absolute crap. My hair was in a greasy bun, and I was wearing a huge hoodie and sweatpants. Not saying that's a horrible look for everyone, but me in particular. I looked like a potato sack with a head and an onion on her head. So I got out at around 8:30 p.m. and it was getting dark. When I got the bus, it was full dark and the bus was completely empty. Now, to explain this properly, you need to imagine the bus I was in and how the seats are positioned. I'm sitting on the first seat next to the window, the left one. I was the first passenger here, so 2 stops later, 3 men get on the bus. This dude, who had the full ability to sit anywhere he wanted to on the bus, elected to sit next to me. I didn't really give it much thought, cause, it's the first row. Maybe he just sat where he could. The 2 other dudes sat in the front next to the driver's seat. We drive for another 2 stops, and a girl gets on. He gets up and moves to the seat behind his, and the girl sits next to me. He started talking to her, and she seemed quite uncomfortable, although giggled along. On the next stop, he moved to the singular seat next to the window. Now, this is where the first red flag comes in. He turns to our full side body and continues talking to her like, "Pretty girl, where are you getting off? Maybe with me?" And she says no and continues giggling uncomfortably. At this point, the driver himself is side-eyeing this dude. A stop later, she gets up to pay and he touches her thigh. She turns around and yells at him to stop. The driver turns around in anger and tells him to sit down and not move until he gets off the bus. Kudos to the driver's honesty. Stuff like this is common bus culture, and it happened a couple of times to me, and nobody ever said anything. Regardless, she practically jumped off the bus and speed walks away. My heart is racing at this point. I know it would have been noble of me to protect her, but I honestly couldn't. I was scared of the dude, and I wouldn't have stopped him. It was 9:45 by now, and the streets are emptying. I had my headphones in, but I turned the music off because I'm scared of this dude and I'm alone with him, and no one but an old man, the driver, and one of the dudes from earlier who's fast asleep are on the bus. That's when he turns to me. "How old even are you?" I didn't answer and pretended not to hear him. He didn't ask again. I was facing away from him and looking out of the window. Instead, I felt the flash of his camera. I turned around and he was holding his phone at me. He was grinning and looked at me as if I were his friend who he'd just pranked or something. I didn't say anything and continued to look out the window. At this point I was full on panicking. I opened my bag as casually as I could and mentally screamed at myself. I'd left my pocket knife at my friend's house earlier that week and kept forgetting to take it back. So I took a pencil out, one of the mechanical ones with a metal nib, and quickly put it in my pocket. Then another flash came. This time it was with the camera too. I literally dialed 911 and sat there. I didn't call it, I just put the number in just in case and texted my friend. Then he was typing something. When I got to my stop, I didn't ask for the bus to stop until we were right at it. The second I was about to pass my stop, I basically screamed for the driver to stop. He quickly stopped, and I got off really quick. He didn't have enough time to get off as well, as the driver soon drove off and left, probably because he realized what was happening and didn't want him to follow me. I still don't understand why anyone would need a picture of me. I don't even want to, especially not then, like that. A couple of days later, when I was at that bus stop, now heading from my place to my friend's place, I saw the guy again. He tried to talk to me and asked me again how old I was. I promptly told him it was none of his business and walked away. He tried to follow me, but I went into the local pet shop, and I know the owner after 6 years of being their regular, and she told him, more strongly, to leave. I never saw him again. nor do I ever want to. This was 2 weeks ago now. I live in a small apartment, a safe one. But anyway, I live alone and no one else has a key to my place. I had had some friends over for dinner. It was late. I said I would do the dishes in the morning. I give the cat some water and turn off the lights. Head to bed. I wake up about 5 to go for a run, flip the lights on, throw on my gear about to head out, and stop to feed the cat. Then I notice my trash can is about 10 feet from its regular spot, which I thought was odd. I am OCD about its placement, so I put it back. But then I noticed the scariest thing. My dishes are all done. They're all put away. My kitchen is spotless. I know I didn't have that much to drink. So by now I'm freaked out. I call the cops. The guys show up and ask what's wrong. I tell them everything. They're just as shocked as I am. No signs of forced entry or anything. The only difference was my kitchen had been cleaned as I slept. And I go to my best friend's apartment while they investigate. They turn up nothing. I'm crapping my pants upon returning to my apartment. I have no clue what to think. I don't believe in the supernatural. But when this happens, small thoughts become big ones. So I truly believed that something supernatural was haunting me for giggles. But an hour later, my neighbor knocks on the door and asks why the cops showed up. I tell her the story. She laughs and tells me she got drunk and Googled how to lockpick, practiced on my door, and then did all my dishes as compensation. I asked her how hard it was to lockpick the door, because it can't be easy. And she tells me this was the 10th time she had tried lockpicking my door, and this time was the first time she'd been successful. But she was drunk every single time. I was just haunted by a drunk woman who was bored. Ever since I can remember, my mother has suffered from explosive anger episodes. Not a day went by without her blowing up at my father or me. As my father spent most of his time at work, I typically took the brunt of her rage. It often became so intense that the noise would set off the dogs barking. As a child, what I could never understand was how my mother could act so resentful one moment, and then at the same time show so much affection. From ages 3 to 10, my mother would regularly show her love by coaxing me to suck her breasts and lean my face against her belly or mon pubis. I can still recall the salty, humid scent, and it makes my insides liquefy. Every day she insisted on dressing me, keeping me in bed with her each night, and soothing my genitals and anus with a cream, even when I assured her I wasn't sore. I wondered if her comments about my developing breasts and an abnormally large size of certain lower parts will ever really lose their impact. My mother is also a very primal person, taking to biting our female dog's ears to, as my mother puts it, asserting her role as the alpha female. After one particularly nasty fight following a school-recommended appointment with a counsellor for chronic stomach aches, my father scolded me for embarrassing the family in disclosing clinical names of the female genitalia with the male therapist. Evidently, the most concerning aspect of my use of these terms was the fact that I used the word clit, something that the counsellor had found odd for a 6-year-old to know, given that the sole purpose of it is for pleasure. When my father approached me about my inappropriate behaviour, I was sitting naked in a bathtub. That was the only time I tried to tell my father what was going on, and he walked out on me, stating that my mother was the best mother anyone could ask for. After all mothers are surely nurturing and incapable of any nefarious activity. It was the night that my parents began to stealthily make love beside me in bed that I finally put my foot down and requested to sleep in my own room. Several years later, when I was about 11, I had retired to bed after a day of my mother giving me the cold shoulder after a blow-up. Evidently, I had forgotten to lock my bedroom door, and someone crept in. I could see my mother's outline against the light from the window. She made her way to the bedside, leaned down and proceeded to lick me all over my face and neck. I remained paralyzed until finally the moist onslaught stopped and I assumed she retreated. Though I didn't recall her leaving my room, in the morning she was gone. Now that I'm an adult, I keep as much distance as possible from my parents. Even during our last family vacation, following my college graduation, she barged into the bathroom while I was changing and commented on how I was growing a nice bush. Not like the hookers who always shave down there, she said. I moved out and into my own apartment not long after. Fortunately, as far as I can tell, my parents treat my much younger sister in a very normal fashion. Even on the rare occasion that I do visit to spend time with my younger sister, I make sure never to sleep under the same roof as my mother. About a year ago, when I was 20, I got a new job. I didn't have a car, so I had to take the bus. I had to catch 2 buses to get to my job. My second stop was a layover, so I typically had about 30 minutes before that bus left. One day, I had gone into the Walmart by the bus stop to pick up some lunch for work. The bus stop was right behind a plaza that had various stores and restaurants. A heavier-set man with curly hair, probably in his mid-30s, walked out behind me. He said, "Hey, has anyone ever told you that you look like Zoe Kravitz?" I have a weird thing about being rude to people who are hitting on me, because I'm terrified they'll hurt me if I'm mean to them. It does happen to women quite often. I just said, thanks, and kept walking to my bus stop. He saw me walking to my bus and called after me. "Hey Zoe, do you need a ride?" I was very irritated that he had called me Zoe. So I just said no and ran onto my bus. About a week after that, I ran into him again at the same Walmart, and I heard, "Hey Zoe," and he ran up to me. I saw him closing the door of a burgundy van. It was one of those stereotypical creeper vans that only had the front windows. This made me super uneasy, and I turned around and kept walking. "Oh, Zoe," I heard him sing from behind me. I replied with, "My name isn't Zoe." He asked me what my name was. One of the Walmart employees saw me looking uncomfortable and ran up to me and said, "Oh, hey Melissa, it's good to see you. I'm about to go on lunch if you want to come with me. I'll go clock out real quick." At first, I was confused because Melissa is also not my name. Then I realized what was going on. So I just said, "Oh yeah, of course." Once we were out of earshot, she told me that they'd been having a lot of problems with that guy doing similar things to women around the plaza. He was known for harassing women, specifically tall, skinny, light-skinned women like myself. She told me her manager was trying to get him banned from the Walmart, but had been unsuccessful. We waited for about 15 minutes, then she walked out with me with a male co-worker, and they snuck me out the back and walked me to the bus. I didn't see him for a while, and then one day, When I went to go catch my second bus, I saw his van waiting in the parking lot near the bus stop. I thought maybe this isn't him, and I'm just paranoid. I walked past the van, and it started moving slowly towards me. "Hey Zoe, we didn't get to talk last time, you never told me your name." I ignored him and started sprinting. He floored it and stopped his van in front of me and got out. I screamed as loud as I could to attract attention because it was broad daylight, and once I screamed, people started to look, and one person came to me and asked if I was okay. He had sped off once I screamed. I went into Walmart and called my co-worker to pick me up. They took me to work for the next couple of days. Then came their off day. I got the bus and thought, well, if I go to Tim Hortons instead of Walmart, I'll be fine, right? I was ordering at the counter, and I didn't realize he had seen me and gone up through the drive-thru. The way this Tim Hortons was set out, you could see right to the counter from the drive-thru window, and vice versa. I heard it. "Zoe," and my heart sank. I ran to the bathroom and hid for a few minutes and walked out. The employees told me that he seemed really pissed off when I didn't respond. I told them that I'd been having issues with him for weeks. This time, I was again escorted to the bus stop by an employee. I looked around for his van and didn't see it, so I felt safe and sat down on a bench. I didn't want to get on a bus yet, because it was a nice day and I wanted to enjoy it. Then I heard screeching and a door slam. He got out of his van screaming, "You gonna stop ignoring me, Zoe?" I scrambled to get on the bus, and he followed me on the bus screaming at me. I started crying and saying, "I don't know you. Stop following me." At this point, the other passengers began standing up for me and threatening the man. He eventually got off the bus. After this, I changed my work schedule so I could ride with a co-worker every day, and I haven't seen him since. This happened in early 2006, when I was living with my mum and stepdad and my 2 adopted sisters. I was 19 at the time, male, and for a little backstory, my job at the time was doing security work in different parts of a West Coast metropolitan city. At the time, we were leasing a 3-bedroom home with a giant living room. One of the bathrooms barely fit one person and had a small window. Included inside is a metal wire shelf thing that holds all my stuff like gel, toothbrushes and razors. My neighbours would hardly speak to each other and would never be home, assuming they'd be at work. This will be important. So this event occurred when I had just gotten off work during a 12-hour graveyard shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And of course, I was tired as hell. So I quickly drove home, said hi to my mum while she made breakfast, and I slumped my way into my room and passed out with my uniform on. Black polo, tactical pants, and tactical boots. The small detail might come into play. I didn't even close the door to my room. That's how tired I was. Now, every day, my mum and stepdad left for work, along with my sisters that needed to head off to school at around 7 a.m. That's usually when I have my freedom and played my PS4, yell at strangers or friends through the mic and whatnot. But this morning, I decided to just catch up on my sleep. I half sleepily awoke to a series of the hardest fast knocks on our wooden door. Mistake number 1. I ignored it and thought that it was a salesman or one of those religious people. Sometimes my stepdad comes home to get lunch, but he has a key to the house, so no worries, I thought, and I quickly fell back asleep. I awoke again to the sound of loud footsteps running on the backward floor towards the door, and the door slamming shut as loud as possible. Mistake number 2. Okay, it was my stepdad running late to work after all, for his lunch break. No biggie. After my slumber, everyone came back home and started preparing for dinner, while I hopped on my PS4, and my mum comes to me with a very serious face and says, "Did someone break into the house? Did you leave any time today?" "No. Why?" "I was just sleeping until everyone came back." "Okay, come look at this." My mum takes me to the little bathroom from the earlier description. I look up at the little window. Cold air breezing through a broken frame and broken hinges. I look at the metal wire shelf, and there was a dent on the top, as if someone had bent it while climbing in. I felt my spine tingle, as that hadn't really hit me at the moment. I thought back to what I heard while I was asleep. I heard someone knocking earlier, and I heard stepdad come to get something before leaving to work in a rush and slamming the door, I said. My mum said, "Mijo, stepdad didn't go to the house today." My throat clenched and dropped to my stomach. My fingertips felt as if they had been frozen. I felt as if my body was sinking down into a deep, dark abyss in the ocean. I couldn't say anything. We stared at each other for an eternity. We started checking the whole house to see if anything had been taken. Nothing. Everything was as is. We asked a few neighbours if they had seen anything, but they weren't home. We gave the local PD a tip just to let them know, and they already had knowledge of this. The person is still out there. My mind kept racing. What happened? Why wasn't anything taken? Why did this mystery burglar decide to run off? We came to the conclusion that this person knocked first to see if anyone was home, but seeing as I didn't answer, they did their duty and stepped into our house. And since I snore really loud, this person might have thought that there was a dog inside the house. Another possibility would be that this person saw someone in uniform and didn't want to mess with me, or just simply the fact that I was in the house. There were many possibilities that could have unfolded. It's clear what this burglar's intentions were, just to grab everything valuable and leave. But what if this was a maniac stepping into my house with other intentions other than theft? The thought of someone watching me sleep from about 5 feet away gets me so anxious no matter where I am. This event made me realize that no matter who you are, you will always be vulnerable when you aren't alert of your surroundings. Now I'm a 5'11" guy, and I'm an average built dude. It's safe to say I would have held my own against someone trying to break in, along with my plethora of bludgeoning and bladed weapons. But even if you're armed to the teeth, you'll never know when someone will be watching you and planning something ill-mannered. There are things and people out there that have been shielded away from most of us, especially in this day and age. You'll never know who you walk past down the street. I am now 22 and married, with a 1-year-old son and daughter on the way. This is something I've learnt from, and will be teaching my son and soon daughter, to be aware of their surroundings, and to not see the bright side of strangers trying to do them a good deed. They'll never know what their true intentions might be. This goes out to anyone hearing this. Be careful and watch your surroundings. This happened when I was 7 years old, and it has stuck with me throughout my life. The only people I've ever told was a girlfriend years ago and another friend who I no longer speak to. Other than those two, I've kept this encounter private for obvious reasons. I was playing a game with my father and sister in the living room of our home. My grandmother was there too, sitting and watching. The game was that my father would lay on his back, lift his feet, and tuck them into a squat, so my sister or myself could sit down on his feet, and he'd push us off, and we would leap into the air and land on our feet, laughing. I remember giggling hysterically and saying, "Higher!" And so he pushed off harder, and I must have lost control and went higher into the air, and came down wrong side up and smacked onto my head. It shook the house. My grandmother was upset, and I stood there as everyone got to their feet and surrounded me. It was in that moment when you're shocked and not going to cry, but it hurt, and you're stunned, before you realise what happened and finally started crying. It ended up being a concussion. My father was told not to let me sleep and to watch me closely. My head, in the weeks that followed, swelled out like a big egg. But it was in that moment right after the impact and before the crying. Over on the table next to the sofa were standing two little blue men, no more than 10 inches in height. They seemed to stand tall, or rather proud, like warriors. Their legs and arms were thin. I could see their mild knobs of knees and elbows. There wasn't much fat on them. They were both very lean, and I could make out a slight muscle tone too on their bare chest and arms. They were both wearing grass skirts, like something you'd see out of primitive native tribes, but the grass seemed wet, like seaweed, and had a bit of a soppy squish lake bed look about it. One of the men was wearing a hat, like an old-style cap, darker red in colour, almost like wine-coloured. The other one I could see his hair more clearly and was long and unkempt, with pieces coming down his face and over his ears. The one without the hat was holding a long spear in his hand. The base of the spear was resting on the ground, and the pole came up to almost his full height, with a pointy stone carved at the top. It was a fast momentary image, and the scene in the living room quickly turned to panic after I hit the floor and my family crowded around me, and once I began to cry, I never saw the two little men again. But I never forgot that image. It felt like they had been there longer than just the short moment when I could see them with my eyes, and there was something sinister feeling about the way they confidently stood there and stared at me. It was clear that they were not afraid of me, or the fact that I could see them. At the age of 7, as this was in the 80s, all I could compare them to were like evil Smurfs. The one's red cap even reminded me of Papa Smurf, but they weren't shaped like Smurfs, and that's where the comparison fell short. I've always been good at drawing, and at one point a few years later, I tried to draw them because I was afraid I might forget what they looked like in their details. I'm not really sure what happened to that drawing. On a final note, warp ahead to the early 2000s. I started Googling it, to try and find more info on the little blue men. I uncovered a picture of a painting from hundreds of years ago. It looked like an illustration of a book or something, on some academic website. Little blue men tearing apart a library and causing mayhem. I think it was called The Blue Men, or something like that. In red caps, and they had the same stature and build. They were so strikingly similar to what I saw, that's when I actually had the nerve to tell the story to one of my friends. Since then, I've never been able to find that picture online again. All I ever find now are the Blue Man Group and other unrelated things. I get the feeling that they don't want to be found. Has anyone else ever seen anything like this? When I was 17, my mum and I argued quite a bit. I always found her to be irrational, and I had a hard time choosing to be the adult, as I often had to. One day, I was upstairs in my room playing a multiplayer FPS on my PC, when my mum hollered up the stairs to me that I needed to take out the trash, because it was going to get picked up the next morning. I had explained to her before all about how you can't pause online gaming, so all I did was holler back, "Okay, in a minute." There was no warning signs. I had no idea she was upset until she was already up the stairs and in my room, screaming about me not getting up and doing it right away. She thrashed my room in a matter of seconds, breaking everything, including my monitor and a glass star-shaped candle that my great-grandmother had left me when she passed. Usually I tried to be the adult. Sometimes I argued with her. This time, all I really did was say something along the lines of, "I'd rather be dead than live with you." This was meant to imply that I was going to move out soon. Apparently, she took it as me threatening to take my own life. She called the police, and she talked to them alone, and I talked to them alone. I made them look at my room, and my mum didn't have anything crazier to tell them that I had done than the actual truth, which was not taking out the garbage quick enough. They confided in me that they believed me, and that they agreed that my mum sounded kind of crazy. But they pointed out to me that I was a minor, and my choices were to live there and follow all of her rules, or to be put in some sort of home. They said that due to the nature of the call, they needed to take me to mental health, regardless of whether or not I wanted to continue to live with her. On the way there, they assured me that they could tell I wasn't a threat to myself, and that I would just have to sit down with the therapist for a few minutes and could be on my way. In the waiting room, it was just me and one other person, a girl who was on meth and had just been in some sort of domestic dispute. She kept talking to me, and she had the wildest look in her eyes. I've seen a lot, and I'm not easily scared, but she was somewhat intimidating without trying to be. The worst part was that she kept going into the bathroom and coming back out with blood all over her hands. She would walk away from me just seeing her normal crazy self, but would exit the bathroom with her bloody hands in the air, a hysterical mess. She would be crying and screaming and saying that things didn't make sense. The first couple of times, the nurses thought she had been cutting herself, and kept demanding that they tell them where the source of the blood was. But the last couple of times, she did it, and they didn't ask her where the blood was from at all. I was still curious, but I still didn't want to ask. It made no sense to me that the staff could just get used to this. It wasn't a big deal when she would go back into the bathroom and come up with blood all over her hands, her whole body trembling and her eyes wide and her face covered in tears. They got me to see the therapist. She was really nice and very understanding, and after talking to me for a few minutes, she told me that she dealt with people like me all the time, and that I wasn't one of the ones she needed to worry about. So I would be being released as soon as I left the room. She let me use her phone in her office to call a friend who would come and pick me up. I told him he needed to hurry up and get there as quick as possible to get me the hell out, briefly mentioning the girl with the repetitively bloody hands. It was the disgusting yet sympathetic look that came over the therapist's face as I said this that finally clued me into what the blood must have been. All of a sudden, it clicked in my mind, and I knew that there was only one way that female could have been having that blood all over herself, and yet had no wounds. The image of her bloody hands, only 2 feet away from my face, flashed in my mind, and I suddenly felt embarrassed and didn't know what to say. All the relevant information had been relayed, so I hung up on my friend and left the therapist's office without saying anything. Luckily, the girl wasn't in the waiting room anymore as I passed through it, nodding at the receptionist at the front desk. I can honestly say that when I left that building that day, I was happy to be going home to my irrational mother. She no longer seemed so bad now that I had something to compare her to. From time to time, I think of that girl, and imagine her out there somewhere in the world. I wonder what kind of crazy stuff she's been through, and what kind of crazy stuff she's currently mixed up in. I hear someone call someone else crazy, and I quietly think to myself that they likely have never seen what I have seen. I seriously hope that I'm never on her level, and I hope to never meet her again. I want to start off by saying that I am someone who suffers from an overactive imagination. I tend to see things that are just not there, or being sensitive to certain noises. I tend to think this is due to me having Asperger's and move on, but this was entirely different. I live on the top floor of an apartment that I rent from my family where I live by myself. It's nice to receive the independence that I yearned for, and it helped me come out of my shell by getting me back into exercise, cooking, and genuinely going out and about with my day with a wider and happier stride. I've always loved horror, as well as tabletop games, although I am a self-professed coward, and tend to make a good impression with people I meet thanks to years of growing, therapy, and helping me find myself. I moved into this apartment in the winter of 2007, and when moving, I noticed that the apartments opposite were empty. I spoke to my parents, who said they never saw who used to live there, but whoever it was soon moved out and were never seen from again, only to be visited by bailiffs which have since stopped. The place has already made me uncomfortable, as I had to face away from that door to unlock mine. The lock on my door was broken for a while, meaning I had to be very specific with how I unlocked it, or the key would end up being jammed. I would always feel eyes burning at the back of my neck, looking behind me, only to see the same white door, my eyes leading up to the peephole. I remember once staring at that peephole for a whole 5 minutes, looking for any subtle changes in light. I'm quite a big guy, 250 pounds at 6'1", but there was a feeling that made me feel like I was 6 years old again. Each time I passed that door to number 13, I could swear that I heard noises coming from within. Footsteps, quiet arguing, and even the door jiggling. Each time something like that happened, I felt my soul dying just a little bit more. I soon caught myself unlocking my door and entering my safe haven to get lost in books, video games, and other stuff. At my job, I tend to work later sometimes if I need to speak to a team in America, or if I just cannot face waking up early. I work for a large firm as an analyst, although I wouldn't want to get into much detail regarding that, and since it was bang in the middle of winter, it would tend to get dark at around 4:30 to 5. I would walk down the public driveway and look up to my apartment, but only to notice that the blinds next door were shut. I don't remember if they were always shut, as I never focused on it, but it immediately felt off, as if you were looking at a puzzle, only to notice in the right center that a piece was missing. I climbed the stairs leading up to my door, lost in thoughts, because I was having a particularly bad time at work during then. I was staring at the steps in front of me, before I found myself on the same landing, but this time, something felt off. I could smell something was off. I immediately thought it was just rubbish from downstairs, and that was yet to be collected. But there was something different. The air felt heavier, almost colder, as I approached the door. There was a smell of rotting meat that I had never noticed before. I knelt down by the door, letting my backpack to the side as I leaned against the door. It was from there. There was a smell. My mind raced, as I could not immediately pin what on earth was causing it. I laid on my front and tried to look under the gap, only to immediately start gagging, almost vomiting as I keeled back. I gripped the carpet, rolling away and knocking over a couple of things as I clenched my fists. It was the smell of death. Have you ever smelt a dead animal? A fox on the side of a path that is rotting. You can see its ribs slightly poking out as maggots writhe and squirm in the decaying flesh. It was that smell. I stared through the gap, only to be met by pitch black. I could have sworn that I saw something pushed to the side, but I didn't want to stay there any longer, and I darted up and retreated inside, calling my dad to tell him about it. It wasn't too long after that, perhaps a day or so, when I heard that the building manager had went into the property, and that was it. Nothing else was said about it. No one else could tell me what happened, or they did not want to. I thought I saw a look in my dad's eyes when I questioned him, and all it beckoned me to do was to shut up and accept that sometimes answers just don't give you closure. I never knew what happened behind that door, nor would I ever wish to know. I don't know if my mind is playing tricks on me when I get a nasty shiver race down my spine whenever I look at the painted oak door, treating whatever was there as a gentle facade, much like how some wear a mask to hide what is behind their own eyes. I sometimes swear I can still smell it, whatever it was. I sometimes think that someone was dead, but I don't think I will ever know or want to know. This was 2015. I wasn't really actively looking, but would pop on OkCupid every few weeks to see if anything interesting was in my inbox. Being female, I had a very active inbox. Sorry guys. And I noticed an email from an interesting, fairly local guy. Email was alright, asking about polyamory, which I don't mind talking about if the person asking is sincerely interested and respectful. We got into chatting, and I had zero romantic interest, but thought this could be a friendship. After a few months of chatting, he found me on the Book of Faces and asked if it was okay to send an ad request. I agreed. We'd been chatting, getting along well, and he seemed like a nice person. Little weird, but that's okay. I'm a little weird myself. No big deal. We continued to chat here, and for about 2 years. We'd sent birthday greetings, just casual friendship, and he asked me several times to meet and hang out. I've considered it, but at the time I was running my own business and working in upwards of 70 hours a week, plus maintaining my own home, raising my younger child, as the older is an adult, and trying to balance 2 partners, an extremely needy, demanding alcoholic client who has no boundaries. 11 PM phone calls occurred without a note of hesitation or remorse on vacation, so meetups never occurred, but we kept in touch online. Late last year, a news story broke out about a man and his girlfriend who sexually assaulted and then killed the woman's young teenage daughter. I never connected the name until a few friends contacted me and said, "Oh, I see you're friends with Thingy in the news." The news stories all use his full legal name, not his nickname, Think Richard versus Dick, which is why I never connected the two. It was him. My then online friend of 2 years had beaten, sexually assaulted, and killed, and then dismembered his girlfriend's teenage daughter, with his girlfriend's help. He made several statements since then, stating that he's always had this fantasy, and that the child was very seductive, and that it wasn't fun finishing her, as he apparently thought it would be. It still sends a chill down my spine. I dodged a bullet big time. Be safe out there. You never know who's on the other side of that keyboard or phone call. Back when I was in college, about 7 years ago, I had to move from an apartment to another last minute. Because, well, I was a lazy college student and hadn't made any other plans. My parents were in town, so we were looking for something quick. Luckily, we found something pretty cheap and somewhat nice right off the front of the university. They were thrilled. I was just happy this was over. So I move into this kind of 4-room basement which was already furnished. They said the last tenant cancelled last minute, and I only needed it for the 3 months of the summer, so he was giving us a fantastic deal. The first room was the main room, which consisted of a living room and a little table to eat. Immediately on the right of it was the kitchen and then the bathroom. The bedroom was on the left, and there was some kind of weird and small hall/connection joining it to the living room. Since the start, I always felt kind of uneasy about the bedroom for some reason, and preferred to sleep in the living room, since there was already a comfy sofa bed in there, and there was no windows in the bedroom. Throughout the semester, I felt countless times that someone was watching me from that bedroom, when I was alone, watching TV, or playing video games. It was a weird and eerie feeling, to the point where I preferred closing the door leading to the bedroom altogether. I wasn't home that much, and sometimes I slept at a friend's, but every time I came back, it felt like I wasn't alone in that apartment, and there was never any sounds or sights, just a strange feeling. I spoke of it to my friends and they laughed, since I was never the superstitious kind. So I kind of brushed it off the whole time, and thought nothing of it when I finished the semester. I just moved on with my life. About 2 years ago, one of my friends from college texted me, "Hey, is the door number you lived at in that creepy basement back at uni 14? I was like, "Yeah, why?" He then sent me a picture of an old local newspaper page. He had been through them at the library, looking for a picture of him back in his college football days. In it was the obituary section from 2009. The picture of a young and good-looking female student. Next to her picture was the picture of a door and a dress, which I recognized very well. She hung herself in her bedroom closet. I had recently moved from Adelaide to Melbourne to live with my boyfriend, now husband, in a share house unit with one of his friends and his girlfriend, Nikita. My boyfriend and his friend were at work, whilst Nikita and I were home. This was in a small 2-story, 2-bedroom unit in a beautiful family-friendly suburb, close to a local shopping mall. We loved our neighbours, the street and area in general, and had never had any issues prior to this. Both the bedrooms were upstairs. Nikita was sleeping in, and I had just made my way downstairs into our kitchen/lounge room. This was also the main room of the unit, with the front door, back door, and garage door on different walls of the room. It happened at around 10 a.m. I can't explain how quickly the following events occurred, but it was all very sudden. I was standing at the sink, about to fill the kettle, when I heard the garage door open. My first thought was that it must be Nikita in the garage. We smoked out there, and not in the house, so I walked around the fridge to greet her. No more than 2 meters in front of me was a man rushing into the room. He yelled, "What's going on?" We later laughed at this, saying that we should have asked him that. As I had a split second to process what was happening and register his face before turning and running for my best escape route, which in my mind was the stairs, the front door was closer but deadbolted, and Nikita was upstairs. There was no way I'd leave her there. I ran as fast as I could, almost tripping over myself and the steps as my legs felt like concrete jelly, if you can imagine that. As I reached the top of the stairs and Nikita's bedroom door, I burst into her room, slammed the door and leant against it, chest heaving, and yelled for her to wake up. "Nikita, where's your phone? Wake up! There's a man in the house!" I half screamed, half cried. She sat up groggily asking, "What?" "There's a man in the house. Where's your phone?" Her eyes widened in terror as she saw me against the door. It had no lock. I heard nothing and figured we could make it to the bathroom, which had a lock, opposite from her room. The bathroom! Now! We didn't even question it. We just threw her door open and dashed into the next room. As I dialed the police, we heard heavy footsteps coming up from the wooden stairs. By now we were both hysterical. I was begging the operator to send someone immediately, as the guy was coming to find us. He must have heard us on the phone to the cops, because after a pause, we heard hurried thumping down the steps again. The cops were there within 2 minutes, as they were only 3 streets away. We heard sirens, and the operator told us the police were there and that it was safe to come out. They didn't find the guy. I gave a full description as best I could from the glimpse I caught, and was later asked to go to the police station in order to help construct an image to identify him. He was not much taller than I, perhaps 5'4", mid-40s, bald in the middle, with shaved hair around the sides of his head, wire-framed glasses, stubby goatee, and dark, beady eyes. Fleecy zip-neck sweater, but I didn't get a good look at his pants. The scariest details came later. We realized the guy hadn't stolen anything. There was easily accessible items which he could have taken in a hurry. Laptop, phone, which was closer to him than me when he entered, and nothing taken from the garage. Another thing, there was no forced entry. The garage door to the house can only be accessed from inside the house or garage. He had opened the electronic roller shutter to the garage and entered the house via the door. That roller shutter could only be opened from the inside, manually, or outside with a remote control, which my boyfriend and his friend were never given when they moved in 6 months ago. I showed the identity sketch to our neighbours to alert them and a group of women next door, a mother and sister, and the lady's 16-year-old daughter, and they said he looked 99% like the previous tenant of our unit. We notified the police, as well as giving the names of 3 different people's mail still delivered to our address, plus told our housing agent. We checked the lease agreement, which stated the house keys and garage remote control were to be included. Only the keys were signed for. The remote control had been missing. Scarier still, a week or so later some detectives came to the door to ask if I'd seen or heard anything more. I told them no. They handed me their car and left. I learnt that they were investigating about sexual predators. I feel sick knowing that. I told Nikita and our neighbours, and we all kept a close eye on things, but nothing more came of it, thankfully. I just wonder if they ever found the guy before he threatened anyone else. My story goes like this. When I was 15 and a sophomore in high school, 2 of my friends came over to stay the night. We wanted to go visit another friend's house, who lived across an arroyo. In New Mexico, that's what we call ditches, and a few streets away. It wasn't that far to walk, and it was around 11 p.m. We begged my mum to let us walk, because we 3 girls together felt like we could take on the world. We dressed in hats and baggy sweatshirts, because we felt like that would make us less noticeable. What can I say? We were just teenagers. We decided to start walking after wearing down my mum, who finally allowed us to go. She tried convincing us to let her drive multiple times. I wish she had. Walking under a very dark night sky in the cold seemed fun and adventurous. We laughed and talked a lot, crossed the arroyo, and turned along a street that was a little more lit than the main ones. We thought it would be safer. It was just a typical suburban neighborhood. We get 3 houses down, and in our rear we hear a car. A car coming along without its lights on. Okay. A bit creepy. We decide to hustle along, and he speeds up. He was right next to us. We would speed up, and he would do the same. We slowed down, so would he. A man with glasses driving alone. I was starting to get really scared. My heart was pounding, and I was regretting being a 15-year-old who felt like it was a good idea to walk after dark. The man taps on his little horn. Not a loud honk, but a short one. He stares at us. Well, that's when we started freaking out. We decided right there and then, and they were going to knock on a neighbour's door to see if they would let us in to call my mum. All the houses along the row were dark, so we rushed back towards the corner house just before the dark arroyo, and we would inevitably have to cross it to get home. It was the last house that we could try. By the way, none of us had cell phones, as this was 2001, and most high schoolers didn't have phones back then. Home phones and pay phones only. We knock on the door while the car followed again, and stopped right at the house we were at. An older lady opens the door very hesitantly with her husband. We explained that we were sorry, but we were being followed by a single man in a car and he's really scaring us. She lets us in to use her phone, and I remember her house being filled wall to wall with crucifixes. Nothing against crucifixes, but in that situation that scared me even more. When we came back outside, the car was gone. We got picked up and home safe. We could hardly get to sleep after the adrenaline rush. It was one of the scarier moments of my life. What was even scarier still was I rode my bike in broad daylight back to that house the next day to leave a thank you note for letting us use the phone when most people wouldn't. As I pulled around the corner, I saw that the car that was following us was in the neighbour's driveway. That has forever spooked me. I now have 2 kids of my own, and I will never, ever want them walking around at night. This happened when I was a teenager. around 14 or 15 in high school. I had a boyfriend at the time who lived a fairly short walk from the school, and we would often walk to his place after school ended and hang out for a few hours before I went home. Because we took the same route so often, I knew all the houses and landmarks on the way. In January, I live in the north so the winters can be pretty cold and snowy, my boyfriend and I started to notice a car that had been parked in the same spot for quite a while. We thought nothing of it at the time. Maybe the car had died in the cold and whoever owned it couldn't afford to have it repaired. But as spring came and the snow melted, the car was still there, parked in the same spot at the end of my boyfriend's street. We passed it almost every day as we walked there after school, and as the days grew warmer, a rotten stench started to rise from the car. I joked to my boyfriend, "I bet there's a body in the trunk," and we laughed it off. But we were curious, so one day we peered inside the car's windows as we passed. The car was messy, but not filled with trash or food. A discarded backpack lay across the seat, and papers were strewn here and there. It looked just like an ordinary car, except we knew that it hadn't moved for months, and the smell was indescribable. The smell continued to get worse as the spring turned to summer. One day, when I couldn't come over for some reason, my boyfriend and his dad decided to investigate the car. They found the doors were unlocked and the keys were inside the car. That was pretty strange. They went around the back and popped open the trunk. My boyfriend told me that a swarm of black flies flew up from inside. The smell was definitely coming from the trunk. Inside were a bunch of black garbage bags. My boyfriend and his dad called the cops at this point. The cops later told us that inside those bags was rotting meat, cut into pieces. The first pieces of meat they tested belonged to a pig, but a few weeks later, my boyfriend's dad got another call. Under the pig meat were the bones of a human child. Whoever left that car sitting unlocked with the keys inside was obviously hoping the car would be stolen. It still gives me the shivers. For the last year, I've been having to go to the laundromat at least once a week, due to not being able to afford a new washer and dryer up front. It's never been an issue until a few weeks ago. I went one night, and there was an older gentleman sitting there. I've never seen him before, but there aren't really the same people when I go. At one point, I heard him mumbling to himself, but there were plenty of people, so I wasn't worried. I walked out the door to my car, and he was sitting at a table with his head down. When I got around to the driver's side of my door, I looked up at him, standing at the laundromat door, staring straight at me. I froze. I was so scared. I sent my husband a text with a full description of him just in case. Last week I was there with my oldest son, and the same man was just sitting there wearing the same outfit, so I started to wonder. We were the only three there, and my laundry was the only laundry being done. It clicked that maybe he's homeless, and he comes at night to stay warm. I left a couple of dollars by the vending machine when I was leaving, as I heard him get change and get a snack. A couple of nights later, I had to go again to wash blankets, and he was there once more. These two occasions I never got any weird vibes like the first night, and I wrote him off as harmless. Tonight, I had to go there with my 3 kids while my husband was helping a friend at his house. When we got there was no one but us, and we were sitting at the front of the place. My laundry was in washers at the back, so when I went back to check the washers, I saw it was almost done. I continued around the corner to grab a basket, and the homeless man was standing there, I jumped because I didn't hear anyone come in, and he definitely was not there when we walked in. I continued past him and walked up to the other side where my children were sitting. At this point I hear him talking to himself. She saw me and got scared and ran off. You're stupid. And I heard the bathroom door slam shut. Alarm bells are going off, and I'm quietly hurrying my kids to get their stuff gathered. I considered slipping out of the front door that we were sitting by and walking down the alley and around to my car. It was dark and my kids were already getting scared, so I decided not to. We all held hands and walked straight to the back. I thought he was still in the bathroom because I didn't hear him come out. When we passed the sitting area in the back, he was standing there combing his hair. We continued out the door like we weren't peeing our pants scared. I got them in the car and went around to get in, and he was there again standing at the back door, staring at us. I quickly got in, locked the doors and left, and called my husband so I could pick him up. We all came back to switch the clothes and wait for them to dry. The man was still there. The man walked out staring at me the entire time. He did 2 circles around the place still staring. My husband went back in once the clothes were dry and said the man wasn't there. I'm officially creeped out by this. I plan on going during the day from now on, and I don't plan on staying if I'm the only person there. Hopefully, by the beginning of the year, I can stop going. Am I being crazy? Or is this a real creep? This story is from a few years ago. Probably 2009 or 10. I was in college, and I used to drive a little manual 2-door. It had a back seat, but if you were over 5'6", it was basically impossible to sit comfortably. I was walking out of a big box store one night, and there's this dishevelled woman in hysterics outside. She's claiming that her boyfriend took her paycheck to go get high, and now she can't get home. Well, where's home? I asked. She answered that it was a town that was probably 20 minutes away, but for me, it wasn't that far out of the way to help a random crying lady. During the car ride, she acts more and more fidgety, and tells me about her history of drug abuse and her abusive druggy boyfriend, and how she probably won't be able to pay rent and everything like that. Meanwhile, we're driving out to a more and more secluded part of town, and the drive is taking longer and longer. About halfway through the drive, she mentions that she also has a host of mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar, and now I'm beginning to wonder about the truth to her story. But whatever, that explains the fidgeting, if she's just got done with a panic attack, adrenaline and whatnot. Finally, after 40 minutes of driving, we reach a house with no lights and no cars there, as she told me she lived with her kids and her mum. And she starts to fumble around and hand me money for gas. I told her not to worry about it, because my mileage is fine and she needs to pay for her rent. She hesitated then, and I'm not sure if she hesitated because I was not accepting the money, or if she was thinking of doing something else. But I was alone in the middle of nowhere, near an empty house. I turned my GPS on with my directions to home to indicate I was leaving. Pretty quickly, she got out of the car, went into a completely different direction away from the empty house, and into the woods. I never saw her again, and I'm not sure if she was just scared, or if she was trying to lure me out into the middle of nowhere for whatever reason. A part of me hopes she was really just coming down from a panic attack after getting left in a parking lot by her abusive druggy boyfriend, and that she was just jittery because of that. But while it was happening, I definitely started getting a feeling that something was not right. I've thought about it before, and considered that my manual transmission, my GPS having phone, which is less common in a college town in 2010, as most of my friends still had flip phones, or something else changed her mind about doing anything weird to me too, if she was considering it. But hey, at least it was a relatively happy ending there. This happened a few weeks ago. I recently graduated from college with a degree in biology, but decided to take a minute for myself before applying for medical school. My school was in a dangerous area, and I still rent in the area because my roommate is a master's student at the same university. We live about 5 blocks off campus, on a street where you wouldn't want to be caught alone at night. One day, I was by myself in our apartment, jamming to some tunes, and I heard banging on the door. This was odd, because my apartment is in a row home style, with 2 other apartments below me, and a front door, which I had most certainly locked behind me when I entered the building about 10 minutes prior. It was also concerning because I'm a 5-foot-tall woman and currently alone. Since we live on the top floor, nobody but my roommate and I ever go up to the 3rd floor, and I have not recently subbed a maintenance request. I turned the music off and sat still for a moment. The banging started once more. Now I recognise that this was stupid, but I walked to the front door and opened it, and see in the tiniest crack a large, dirty, heavy-set man with a beard on the other side. I asked, "Can I help you?" He looked me in the eye and said, "I'm here to fix the air conditioning leak. You need to let me inside the unit so I can make the repairs. My management company only has one regular maintenance worker who I was familiar with, and I'd never seen the man standing at my door previously." He took a step forward and I quickly said, "Wrong place," and slammed and locked the door. Initially, I wasn't too concerned, because maybe he was at the wrong place. I emailed my landlord to ask about maintenance reports in the area, to which she replied, "The company have an HVAC technician out today, but none to your address." What did he look like? After describing him as a large, heavier white man with a full beard, she responded, "That's not our guy. He's a small, thin man. Not sure who that was." Now, I'm worried about my safety, because clearly someone has keys to our building, and even my management company can't account for who he could have been. They will also not change the front door locks, so I'm kind of on my own on this one. I hope he doesn't come knocking again. My dad's side of the family is based out of southern Ohio. Once every year or so, my parents and I would make the 6-hour drive to visit my grandma and my dad's old friends. I dreaded these trips because of the excruciating boredom that was always involved. I was just a 7-year-old kid, an only child, with strict Catholic parents who refused to buy her a Game Boy, so I would jump at every chance to entertain myself. This usually meant going to the store with my mum, or tagging along with my dad when he went to see his friends. One of my dad's friends, Dave, had 2 boys, Henry and Sean, both a few years older than me. When my dad went to visit Dave, I would be expected to go join him on whatever the boys were doing, which was mostly sitting in the basement playing some first-person shooter on their big screen. On one of the occasions I was getting bored of watching Henry and Sean shoot NPCs, so I suggested we play hide and seek. Henry agreed, but Sean demanded that we play with all the lights off. I was still afraid of the dark, so I whined about it, but Sean pulled the "It's my house" card, which is insurmountable as a kid. Henry and I found our hiding spots, and then the lights went out, and Sean began to count. 1, 2, Freddy's coming to get you. This was unsettling, and after that there was silence, and I waited. It wasn't long before the adrenaline started to build, and I had felt the super disquiet that children feel in the dark many times before. But in that moment, I felt the full weight of terror. I knew in my whole heart that something was going to happen to me if I was found. I don't know how long I stayed in my hiding spot, but eventually I was seized by survival instincts and bolted to the top of the stairs where light shined through the crack at the bottom of the door. I just yelled, "I don't want to play anymore," after being chided and called a baby. I was led upstairs to Sean's room with the promise that we were going to find something else to do. I didn't care what it was. I was just glad to be out of the basement. When we entered Sean's room and Henry closed the door, I stood there watching Sean dig through a drawer. In my head, he was looking for a game we could all play. I was wrong. He suddenly produced a large knife. He proceeded to open it, smile, and say, "I would love scaring the crap out of civilians." He then started inching towards me with the knife in his fist. I backed against the wall and started to panic, my face contorting and tears welling up. I began hyperventilating for the first time in my life. Henry stood to my left, blocking my only way out. Fortunately, he said, "You're making her cry, let her go," and opened the door. I ran as fast as I could into the living room, and I sat down at my dad's feet, still shaking and tearful. I didn't tell on Sean, fearing he'd try and get back at me for it. My dad didn't notice the state I was in. He was absorbed in the episode of Cops that was on TV. I was thankful that we drove away from there. Years later, I was talking with my mum, and the subject of Dave and his family came up. I recounted my story, apparently for the first time, and she told me she knew all along that Sean wasn't right. She said one night when our families were together having a bonfire, Sean caught a large frog. He began throwing it up in the air and letting it thud on the ground. Once he got bored with that, he started dangling it over the fire. My mum told him to stop, so he paused, looked her dead in the eye, and threw the frog in the fire. My mum said she'll never forget the sizzling noise the frog made as it was engulfed with flames. It's been years since our families had contacted each other, but I think about Sean and Henry often. Part of me wants to check the Ohio criminal database to see if Sean has a record. It wouldn't surprise me. When I was about 7, my 2 brothers and I were playing in an area that was used as an unofficial motocross place. We decided to dig a tunnel for some reason, being the extra smart guys we were. It took a few hours to dig about 6 feet in and 2 feet high. I was right up at the face when suddenly the tunnel collapsed. It was all dirt with no supports. The world went instantly black and hot, and I mean hot like a furnace. I couldn't move a muscle from all the weight of the soil completely enclosing me. I started to really panic, as you do. Everything started turning red, which I guess was blood being forced into my head. Every breath was getting harder as the soil constrained me more and more. Even though my hands went in my face, I couldn't move my arms to clear the dirt around my head, and also started breathing in dirt, which made me cough, which made me contract my stomach, and then I couldn't draw breath at all. This isn't what made me panic though. The total darkness turning red, with the incredible heat, made my young mind think I was going to hell. I don't know how long I was buried for, but it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly I felt someone grab my feet. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse to pull me out, and managed to reach me and get me out of there. We never told my parents. I just went home and got hosed down.